Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Jason Hagholm Sports Experience. I am joined today by a special guest in former McMaster Marauders Quarterback, Marshall Ferguson. Marshall, thanks for joining me.
Former quarterback always sounds weird. It's new, but thanks for having me, Jason.
It's very weird for me. It's going to be weird not seeing you on the field this September, but we're not here to talk OUA, CIS football. We're here to talk the Championship Sunday, which was the NFC and AFC Championship games. One was downright an instant classic, and the other one, got out of hand really, really fast. We'll start with the NFC Championship game, which was the instant classic here. Marshall, I mean, what a game. The Packers look like they have it in the bag with 5 minutes left, and then Seattle put on one of the craziest set of drives I've ever seen in the game of football. Talk to me what was going through your mind when you were watching that.
Yeah, it was definitely a ride of emotions for sure. And there's so many ups and downs. And the first thing that jumped out to me watching that game was just the creativity from the Seahawks offense. Not necessarily in that first half, where I believe they only had about 32 yards passing or something like that. But when you look at the way that they were able to evolve throughout the game and make decisions and to change their play calling and to kind of alter the way that they were trying to attack with Russell Wilson, it was pretty impressive for me as a guy who's played at a decently high level to watch them kind of figure it out through the game, because all too often in those big games it comes down to who can make the big decisions and who can alter their schemes enough to create an issue for the other team. So the thing that I enjoyed the most, to be honest with you, was I watched ESPN NFL Countdown yesterday morning, and Russell Wilson in his sit-down interview with Boomer was just saying, how he hates running. And as soon as he said that and he had the look on his face, I was thinking, that is complete BS, and that's you throwing up a front so that you can go absolutely run wild. Because I know that they love to play the league just like the Patriots do when they do those media things where they say, yeah, we have no interest in running the ball this week, and then they come out and pound you for a couple hundred yards. But Russell, in the end of that game, knew that it was crunch time, the season's on the line, and that's, I think that's why we love the NFL, because he was able to kick it into another gear. And if you look back at, and I don't have stats on this, but from viewing the Seahawks games in prime time, I've seen a bunch of their games this year, the number of times that Seattle runs their zone read, their just basic zone read, leave the end for you and take off running, I think Russell probably hands that ball off at least 80 to 85% of the time. And at the end of that game, you can go back and check it again. I don't have stats on it, but I think there was 2 or 3 times in a row in those last 2 touchdown drives where he pulled the ball and just went, it wasn't big yards, but it completely changes the way in which the defense is able to react to you. And one of the times that he pulled was on the touchdown that he got in that put them within 7, I believe, or whatever it was there. So, just very interesting from a quarterback's perspective to be able to see them change their schemes, evolve, and also for Russell to kick it into another gear and show why he's one of the best in the game.
Yeah, honestly, I always think I have been saying to a lot of people that I think Russell Wilson's in the elite quarterback rankings, and I think he really proved that yesterday, because he played probably the worst set of football I've seen him play, even going back to his days at in the NCAA, both at North Carolina State and that 1 year with Wisconsin. And honestly, he threw 4 interceptions, especially that one with 5 minutes left. You think it'd be done. From a quarterback's perspective, again, Marshall, what were you be telling yourself and your teammates with that amount of time left in such a big game situation? Because I know you've been there.
Yeah, all you can do in those situations is hope you get another chance. We had a game at Western this year where we turned the ball over on downs, I believe it was, with about 4 minutes to go, and when you go to the sideline, obviously it looks pretty bleak, and I'm sure that's the way that the Seahawks looked at it, but all you can hope for is to get the ball back and to have another chance. And when you're given that breath of fresh life with getting the ball back in whatever way it might be, then all you can do is go to work and do what you're trained to do. And the mindset of a great quarterback, like you're saying Russell Wilson is, and I completely agree with you, is that all you need is the ball in your hand, and it doesn't matter how much time there was. You saw that in Aaron Rodgers, too, with 1:20 left after Russell was able to lead them back into a lead by 3, converting on the 2-point conversion. Then Aaron gets the ball, and did anyone in the entire stadium have any doubt that he would be able to mount a drive to get into field goal position with 1:20 and a couple of timeouts? No, because that's the type of drive that he puts together in training camp, in spring camp, in OTAs. all throughout the off season, and that's the type of thing that they work towards in that moment. And I think, that's why it was so special for us as viewers to be able to watch that, and guys that analyze the NFL, is because how paramount that situation is, and that's what makes the NFL the most viewed sport in in North America by and large. It's, I believe this year 13 of the top 15 broadcasts on cable TV were Monday Night Football. Even the bad games, even the Bengals blowing out the Patriots, we still watch because we know that it all builds to these kind of moments. So I think that's what made yesterday very, very special for a lot of people to watch. And Russell Wilson's got Russell Wilson's got a pretty bright future ahead of him.
He definitely does, and he's going to get his chance in 2 weeks' time on Super Bowl Sunday against, the greatest quarterback maybe of our generation in Tom Brady. But going back to the beginning of that game, I mean, the Packers, they went out and they were really taking it to that Seahawks defense. Like, Aaron Rodgers was not afraid of the Legion of Boom and Richard Sherman. Took a chance at him. He did get burned, but then the Seahawks not only threw that interception, Doug Baldwin fumbled the kickoff return after they kicked the first field goal. What did you think of Mike McCarthy's coaching strategy after they got the ball back on the Doug Baldwin fumble to not go for it after they had, I believe, that touchdown reversed and decide to kick the field goal? Would you have gone for it in there? Because you can't let that Seahawks defense get a lot of momentum, which is eventually what ended up happening and could be the ultimate turning point, in my opinion, of that game for the Packers.
Yeah, McCarthy's. I was a bit surprised yesterday by how conservative he played the entire game, and I think that sometimes when you get a lead like that, 16-0, that you tend to kind of lock yourself down and not truly be yourself. And I thought McCarthy would stay more true to, he makes smart decisions, but he's typically, kind of an Andy Reid type guy where he's pretty aggressive in all of his decisions, whether it's clock management at the end of a half or whether it's when to attack, when to be aggressive, when to go for it on fourth and short in tight situations. So, yeah, I was surprised by that. I think that, people are talking today about how much blame, most, some, none, that he deserves for them losing. I don't think you can put a ton of blame on that situation because it's his nature and it's his gut instinct, and, that's what coaches are judged on, obviously, and that's what we say makes all other coaches so great. But, I don't know if you can put too much on McCarthy, because I think that's one of those moments that you just kind of go with your first instinct. And unfortunately, we don't know if he made the right or the wrong one, but we did see, Pete Carroll kind of hit his aggressive button. And in the playoffs, when you're able to pull out plays like that fake field goal touchdown pass from one of the good old Canadian boys, then that tends to kind of cement your legacy in playoff football as your ability to be that gutsy coach that, does the right thing in the right moment. But if it goes wrong, then, we're talking about the exact opposite thing. So it's all catch-22. It's a little bit of chicken and the egg playing back and forth, but it's always fun to analyze those coaches and their late game decisions.
Well, the one thing I always found that interesting in that game for the Packers was how they really, I felt in the first half, really used Eddie Lacy to the best of his ability, because they were trying to utilize him in the Week 1 matchup, and it was not really working. I mean, Lacy did get dinged, had a concussion, had to leave the game. He was used pretty well, but when you realize the Seahawks were building momentum, I was stunned that they didn't go back to their throwing, and it seemed like Aaron Rodgers was a little bit intimidated by that Seahawks team.
Yeah, and a lot of people want to talk about the back end there on the defense for Seattle, and no good defense starts on the back end. I want to be clear about that. When I go into a game in my OUA CIS career and I look at a defense, the first thing I look at is the D-line and their schemes up front, because if you can't protect your quarterback, you can't do anything. And I think we talk so much about that back end with Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor, Richard Sherman, and the gang that, we tend to forget that up front, Michael Bennett and some of those other D-line, they're kind of a no-name gang to some respects. They get after a quarterback far better than most in the league. And, their defense really does start up front. So I'm not surprised that Rodgers had a little bit of trouble with them. They weren't able to get a ton of pressure. I don't know what number of sacks they had in the game, but they were in on him a little bit. And it doesn't really take getting to a quarterback to make him all that uncomfortable. You just have to get in and around and change his throw points and change his timing with receivers. And that's what makes Seattle's defense so great, is up front they're able to get just enough pressure to make a quarterback change their normal routine, footwork, timing, launch, release, all those kind of things, to the point where balls get tipped and worked on by that back end. So be very interesting to see how Seattle is able to manipulate Brady in the offense after the great game they had.
Exactly, and as well, see what would happen if that game in the Super Bowl gets kind of how this one does, because a lot of people in the stadium, and I think a lot of people, maybe some in TV land, switch the channels, which was one of the biggest mistakes you can ever do. I know that for
Yeah.
personal reasons, when I went to the Lions-Cowboy game last year in Detroit, when Stafford pulled the fake spike and ran it into the Cowboys. The one thing I will say is, McCarthy's getting some blame. I have to say, the receivers for the Packers dropped a lot of balls, and especially one in Jordy Nelson, who down the stretch, was dropping a couple too many passes that I like to see. It seemed ever since that Buffalo game when he dropped that wide open pass, he just couldn't hang on to the passes in the clutch. So I think some of the receivers have to be taken into some blame, not just McCarthy and the special teams incident that we will get to in a second.
Yeah, and the other thing is, too, you can draw a pretty obvious parallel between the NCAA National Championship game, Ohio State-Oregon, and this game, because you look at the formula of what wins games and what loses games, right? In that first couple of quarters of the Oregon-Ohio State game, Oregon receivers couldn't catch anything to save their life, and then you look at also the Green Bay receivers doing pretty much the same thing in the NFC Championship game. On the other side, you look at an offense for Seattle that had 4 turnovers, I believe, or more there, and that's exactly what Ohio State did, and they were somehow able to find a way to win. Obviously the score was a little bit different, but it's just, there's basic fundamentals of football that are going to win and lose you games, and it doesn't matter what level you play at, whether it's OUA, CIS, CFL, NFL, NCAA, any of that. It's a pretty basic formula that goes into winning and losing those things, and it changes over time. It's obviously changed with the passing game increasing, and when you get a defensive line that's beat up like the Colts and the Patriots go running all over them, then obviously that's going to change the formula. But who protects the ball best, who runs the ball the best in the playoffs? It's running and defense. It's an old story, but it still sells.
Well, speaking of running, one man really ran the ball superior and is proving time and time again, Marshall, to be the best running back in the NFL in my mind. Marshawn Lynch, that touchdown that he got to basically tie it before the 2-point conversion was insane. He just split between the defenders like ease, and he's such a big man. He's a bit out there in terms of his interview style and his personality, but when the game's on the line, Marshawn Lynch is such a big factor for the Seattle Seahawks, and he proves it time and time again.
Yeah, he's a great talent. I don't think he's the best running back in the league right now. I think that he is a guy who fits their mentality and their style better than anyone else, and I think that's what separates him from the pack. I don't think in Seattle you could have a running back based on the way that Pete Carroll likes to run his offense that could be, not very physical. I think, DeMarco Murray had a great season statistically. I don't think he's even the best running back in the league right now. He ran behind, 3 Pro Bowl offensive linemen and a bunch of first-round picks up front there. So, but a guy in Seattle to play there under Pete Carroll, traditionally he loves those thick, physical, pounding running backs. He had Landell White when he was on USC that he relied on a lot. So it'll be interesting to see how they continue to rebound to try and use Marshawn in new and creative ways.
Yeah, as a Bills fan, I'm still sore about that trade that the Bills made.
Yeah, it's amazing that he wasn't able to harness the same kind of physicality and anger and all of these things that are making him who he is now, because he's had such a long career already. And I think a running style that's as physical and angry and violent and unbalanced would have been extremely appreciated by the Buffalo fans as well.
Well, absolutely, and they could have, appreciated someone that, at least is talking on the field. The one thing I found very interesting was checking your Twitter actually about that game was that John Ryan has more touchdown passes in the NFL than Johnny Manziel. What did you think of that play call? Because I think that's the most gutsiest call I've seen in football since the Peyton onside kick call in the Super Bowl a couple years ago.
Yeah, it's up there with him for sure. It's I love Pete Carroll as a coach. He comes off to me as one of those gamer guys who's willing to do anything to win, and he's extremely creative. He's a guy who studies. He thinks outside the box like any great coach does. He studies Samoan tackling techniques, and he has rugby players come in and teach them to his DBs, and you see them become one of the hardest striking groups in the NFL. But now you look at the creativity, the imagination of the two teams that you find in the Super Bowl, and that's kind of the mark of a great playoff team. I was lucky in high school to be on a couple of great teams, and obviously had some success at McMaster. And I've learned through those experiences that when you look at the guys that are getting to the championship games and winning those big games, it tends to come with a couple of big knockout blocks. I just talked about the formula it takes to win playoff games, big games, championship games, and along with all of those other things that are, protecting the ball, time of possession, playing great defense, holding your opponent to field goals, and that kind of thing. It also comes with that intangible of having the ability to have the one big explosive player, the trick player, the special player. Those are the plays that win you big games. And again, when you find those unbalanced formations from the Patriots and the creativity and imagination there, and then you find the hidden talent of U of R, but not really that hidden because he used to play quarterback, but John Ryan did a great job. And but yeah, it was, that could be a game planning thing as well. When you look back and you see the way that Ryan took off so confidently without even looking up until he was already standing and running away, that's probably, they know coming off the edge that maybe they'd seen on film that Green Bay likes to dive down on those edges and likes to collapse. So, but yeah, very good coaching, very good game planning, scheming, and obviously extremely well executed.
I don't know if you heard this, but I think today there was a report out that said the Seahawks weren't even going to do that play call until they saw A.J. Hawk out there, and he was, they know him to be too over-anxious on special teams, so that's why they went with the call, because they knew he'd bite for sure, and then they'd find the man wide open in the end zone.
Yeah, it's all game planning when you get to this point in the season. That's what makes the Super Bowl so kind of enticing, is because you get 2 weeks to prepare for an opponent instead of one, and when you give creative minds like Pete Carroll and all of his coaching staff and Bill Belichick, Matt Patricia, and Skip Beat and all of those guys, the ability to have an extra week. Obviously, there's distractions in media day and whatnot, and travel and all of these things that come with the Super Bowl. But it'll be very interesting to see how that works out with them scheming against each other, because when you look at it, it's the Patriots haven't been very successful in recent Super Bowls, even though they have the ability to scheme almost better than anyone else week to week and completely change their identity. So you got to wonder what kind of schemes Belichick's going to come up with to try and match the defense of Seattle. I think that's the marquee matchup. And I think that's what Russell Wilson kind of thrives off as well, is the idea is like last year's Super Bowl that the real matchup is Peyton versus Seattle's defense. I think he loves that, and I think that he finds great joy in being second fiddle to the other offense and then just going in and doing what he does so well.
Well, that's going to be really, really interesting. I think you just brought up, the whole idea in my head of the Carroll versus Belichick matchup is going to be very interesting. Plus the story of that Pete Carroll used to coach the Patriots before branching off to USC, where he was, a mastermind in college, and then getting him that opportunity back in the NFL with the Seahawks. So that's going to be a very interesting matchup, and maybe in later weeks or so we can talk about that. One thing, obviously, I think the play everyone's going to talk about in that game, Marshall, is Brandon Bostic. I mean, you feel bad for him, but when it comes down to football, it's do your job. He was supposed to block for Jordy, and he didn't, and it ended up really costing the Packers more so than he ever thought.
Yeah, that's tough. The stats show that when you go for it on those onside kicks, the percentages are kind of in your favor. It just takes a lot of gusto to be able to call something like that. And when you're put in a situation where you need it, obviously that kind of forces your hand, and you have to show all your cards. But yeah, that's one that'll haunt you for a long, long time, especially when you think about the fact that it applies to more than you. We're not playing tennis. You didn't just double fault to lose the Wimbledon crown. You just let down 53 other guys on a roster, plus a coaching staff and an entire ownership group and a community. And that's tough. That's sports, though. You got to perform in the moment, or you don't get the result that you want.
Exactly. I feel so bad for him. He even made a comment, Bostic did, saying he'd rather the Packers not make the playoffs than live through this right now. So I think the world kind of feels for Bostic, but as well, he didn't follow his excitement. So it's football 101, right, Marshall?
Yeah, it's tough. It's all assignment alignment, and it's, sometimes you got to trust the guys that are in front of you. And even with the kick going a little bit short there, he thought he could get it, but that's an in the moment decision. But yeah, you're definitely not coached to not coached to attack it as a player that's standing in front of Jordy Nelson, who has some of the best hands in the league.
The other play that I thought was absolutely crazy and was drawn up, must have been drawn up by Homer Simpson, was the 2-point conversion where Russell Wilson's running around and he floated maybe a ball that would be intercepted by anyone else other than that game. Luke Wilson catches it, gets the 2-point conversion. What did you think of the play, and have you ever been in a play as crazy as that in your career?
I had a play that's not quite as crazy, but just coming to mind about scrambling around and kind of finding a receiver. I had a play against Waterloo in 2012. We were playing there where we had all hooks called, and I thought that they were in one type of coverage. Then when the ball snapped, they jumped into another, and I squared up to my receiver to get rid of the ball really, really quick, and all of a sudden there was DBs covering every single person. So I scrambled out to my right, and I set up on the sideline hoping to find somebody. There was nobody there. I spun back to my left, ran back to the middle of the field. My O-line did a great job blocking, and I ended up kind of sitting there for about 3 or 4 seconds by myself looking at people running in random directions, scramble drill, and ended up finding our great fullback, slot back, Declan Cross over the middle. So watching that play kind of reminded me of that. But yeah, I think we can all agree the creativity and the imagination of Russell Wilson is something that's very special. And you go back to looking at the Cardinals touchdown that he scored, the running touchdown, where he pulls on one of those zone reads, he runs over to the left, and he's outflanked completely. So what does he do? He just squares up to the defensive end and the linebacker for no reason. That makes no sense if you're trying to juke a guy to give any leverage that you have. Usually you're trying to sell one direction and then cut back the other, or give him a 1-2-1, or playing off those angles. He decided to give up his leverage and square up. He basically gave himself up to the defender. But by giving himself up to the defender, because he's so imaginative and creative and natural and free-flowing in the open field, he squares up to him, his defender squares up, and all of a sudden he has an advantage now because he's faster than that man around the edge, and he ends up getting about a 15-yard running touchdown. So he's a pretty imaginative guy. It's fun to watch him play.
It's definitely fun to watch him play. It's fun to watch those mobile quarterbacks. I mean, a lot of them get slack. That's college style. It doesn't belong. But he's one of the few guys that's made it really work. So obviously the Packers drove down in what was an absolutely impressive drive to even get the 5th Mason Crosby field goal. And then the Seahawks in overtime so far this year have been absolutely deadly. Won't even let you touch the ball. I guess, what are your thoughts about the Seahawks going into the Super Bowl? And as someone who had to suffer such a disappointing loss this year in the Vanier Cup, Marshall, what would have been said in the locker room after the game if you're on the Packers side?
It's pretty quiet. It's pretty quiet in the Packers side if it's anything like our locker room. It's different in professional sports because at the end of the day, you're picking up your paycheck and driving home to your nice house and your family. It's a little bit different than our situation. We played for the absolute love of the game, and there's some teams in the CIS that play a little bit more for that than others, and I think that, to be fair, we were one of the ones that was full of a lot of heart and a lot of guts, and so I know exactly what that Packers room is looking at. But on the bright side, when you think about Seattle and their ability to dig themselves out of a hole and to find a way to get the win, regardless of how ugly it is, there was times this year where McMaster, we were a team that had to dig out of holes and that, wasn't really comfortable holding a lead and didn't, people thought that we were underachievers and thought that we would only do things enough that we could win. And, there's something to be said for finding a way to win regardless of your situation. And I don't see a lot of papers ripping Russell Wilson today for a terrible first half and the number of interceptions and the this and that. The headline is about the third and the fourth quarter. And we had that again in week 1 against Guelph. I think I only completed about maybe 20-30% of my passes in the first half against Guelph this year, and then third and fourth quarter we came back and we won in overtime. It was a pretty similar storyline and script to the Seattle Green Bay game yesterday. So it's definitely a very big difference in emotions. And moving forward towards the Super Bowl, you have to look at Seattle as just a daunting task because the Patriots did not play well against them when they played them a couple of years ago, and those schemes and the things that their defense are able to do. The one thing I do like as a bit of a Pats homer is the idea that Dan Quinn is going to the Falcons as their next head coach. Because typically any time that a coordinator is moving on to a head coach role, his schemes aren't quite as tight. And I could be wrong in that. They could come out and dominate like they did last year in the Super Bowl, but it'll be interesting to see how their defense changes and evolves. And I'm going to go back personally and watch that Seattle New England game in full from a couple of years ago to figure out what kind of schemes they ran, just so you can kind of compare them during the Super Bowl and in the game and and see what they're trying to change, what they kept that worked, and it is a very intriguing matchup. I think it's one that the NFL loves to have.
Well, moving on, I guess, to the other game, I mean, there's not too much to say. Going in, I thought it would be the same story, and it turned out to be, it'd be LeGarrette Blount, who, how conveniently fell back into the laps of the New England Patriots towards the end of the season, and he has turned it on, and he did it again against the Colts, much like last year in the playoffs. LeGarrette Blount is going to be an interesting matchup versus Marshawn Lynch, because now Belichick's got that big, power, speedy, elusive back that he wouldn't have if he went with a Vereen or a Jonas Gray.
Yeah, and the thing about Belichick too is that for all we know, he could sign Danny Woodhead tomorrow off the practice roster if he was healthy, or he finds a way. Nothing is beyond the Belichick personnel moves, and he's, like I said earlier, I keep saying creative because he does have a great football mind. Obviously, everyone knows that, but more than his creativity is his just ability to understand the situation, what's required. And anytime for some reason they have Indianapolis' number and they're willing to look at that defensive line, those linebackers, and know how to scheme them and how to go power run on them. And the Patriots change so well week to week. And yesterday they were using a ton of power traps, and they were using kick-out blocks and wham blocks from a tight end, just crossing the formation and smashing people out of the way. But, going into a game with Seattle's going to play with an easy 40 front and the linebackers kind of spread out all over the box, then, you could see Vereen go in, and Brady could be just handing it off on draws inside and just picking up 4 yards of carry for all they care. The Patriots really don't care how they're able to run the ball. And the game against Baltimore, where they had 14 or something like that yards rushing, I believe it was, kind of displays the ups and downs of the scheming. And that's why you lose a couple of Super Bowls. It's if you guess the wrong scheme and you're too far outside the box, then things aren't going to go well. When you do guess the right scheme, you're going to end up with a 200-yard rusher and 4 touchdowns from your running game. So the offensive line looked completely different against the Ravens than it did from against the Colts, and that's just based on scheme. It's not like you change personnel. It's not like you change motivation. They were in the playoffs. They're ready to go. But it'll be awesome to see what they scheme up. I'm really interested to see what direction Belichick takes that offense.
It'll be interesting because Andrew Luck's kind of the similar style of a quarterback, can really do it with his legs, but has a really powerful arm, and he's always been able to shut down Andrew Luck, so it'll be interesting to see what happens when the Seahawks meet them in the Super Bowl in about 2 weeks' time. I'm really interested in that. Back to the Colts, though. The Colts also had a chance early in that game to maybe have some momentum in it when Boone Herron dropped a wide-open pass. I know it's not his job really to catch passes, but when you're called upon in a situation like that, got to make something happen. And from that moment on, it was like the downfall of Indianapolis.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. Like I said earlier about the Seattle game, you got to make big plays in big moments, and when you don't, then bad things are going to happen. So it's pretty basic in sport that you got to get those big chances, and you got to capitalize on them. And I think that separates the teams that win championships and the ones that don't. And when you look at the teams that are playing in these games, you think about, the double pass that came from the Patriots against the Ravens, the fake field goal that came from Seattle with John Ryan throwing the touchdown. And there's those big explosive plays that I talked about, and those Boone Herron dropping that pass is definitely one that could have possibly changed the complexion of the game moving forward. Not necessarily would have, but it's a play that he definitely wants back. And again, it's kind of like Bostic. It takes a long off season to think about plays like that when you lose in a championship game.
Well, I mean, at least for Herron, I mean, that wasn't the be-all, end-all of the game. But I definitely get your point, though, Marshall. Basically, from that point on, it was total rout. Patriots did what they had to do. Not only were they kept moving the chains, but really running time off the clock, and Indy never had a chance in that game. So I guess moving on to the Super Bowl, I mean, I think this is going to be one of the better ones. Last year was kind of one of the ones from the 80s. It was over before halftime. So what are your thoughts in the Super Bowl here? I'm intrigued on so many levels of offensive matchups, offense for the Patriots versus the defense for the Seahawks, coaching matchups, the Patriots trying to get revenge from that matchup, what in 2012? So many interesting storylines going into this game. Which one would you say is the one that's in particular interests you the most, Marshall?
I'd have to go with, I hate the legacy question when it comes to Brady and Belichick, but the reality is that they've put themselves in a situation with this organization where they have, the ability to be the best statistically, championship-wise, over a lot of people. And that's the storyline that's interesting for me, is Brady trying to get over the hump and finish the deal, because he's appearing in the most Super Bowls of any quarterback ever in his sixth. And, he's only won 3, and he's had 2 very disappointing games in the last couple of years, and I think the hunger is there, and the clock is running out, and it's this race against time with Brady and Belichick and the possible end of an era it seems like it's been coming for 3-4 years, but just hasn't, and he's continued to improve and get better and get smarter about how he plays the game. And him going against that defense in Seattle that is so good at all levels and is so aggressive, and their fans travel so well, and Patriots Nation, it seems to include the majority of the Northeast outside of New York City. And there's all these things about this matchup that make it very, very interesting to watch. But for me, it's got to be, is Brady able to stay on his feet, and is he able to find receivers? Is he able to manage the running game and be able to get the necessary yardage? It might be boring in the first quarter of this game, realistically. I think, sometimes there's a feeling out process in the championship games, but you're going to see the Patriots will be aggressive, but I don't think it's going to be right off the bat. And I think that Brady's going to just manage the game in the first quarter and try and grind away and put some mileage on those DBs, making them run into plays. And, Cam Chancellor's going to come flying in. I guarantee in the first quarter you'll find Cam Chancellor up against Dan Conley, and they'll be staring each other down in a pile, talking to each other. So it'll be very intense. The schemes are going to be great. It's going to be a great matchup overall, but Brady trying to finish the job after so many disappointing finishes in recent years and coming off the ACL in 2007 and whatnot, it's him trying to finish the deal for me is the big one.
Well, the last time, Marshall, that the Patriots were in a Super Bowl in the stadium it's going to be in Glendale, Arizona, was one of the most heartbreaking losses for anyone that's a Patriot fan. It was the Tyree game. The Giants stunned the world. The Patriots were going to go undefeated. That did not happen. As a quarterback, if you're Tom Brady, does that game play into your head a little bit with the championship game back in the same venue?
No, I think when you play, 16 regular season games plus the number of playoff games that they've played in as a group, I honestly, I lost games at Western. I lost a playoff game at Western in 2013 that ended our season. We went back in 2014. We were down by 3 or 4, and we found a way to go down the field and score. It's the great thing about the quarterbacks that are like Tom Brady is they have the ability to, everybody says, oh, you erase the last play and you go to the next one. That's not really true. Everybody likes to come up with this concept of erasing a thought and moving on. You learn from it, you catalog it, you use it to your power and to your mental awareness and your, how you're going to respond in the moment, the next time that same moment appears. And he's been in so many Super Bowls that you're going to see, an air of, I won't say overconfidence, but an understanding of the situation in the moment and how to deal with it and how to make yourself, the most successful that he can possibly be. So Brady going into this game, the venue doesn't really matter. These guys travel so much. They play in so many different stadiums that it won't really matter. Every writer will want to draw comparisons just based on location and setting because it's the romantic, sexy way to connect the two thoughts. But, the only things that are similar about this game is that they're playing a team from the NFC and they happen to be playing at University of Phoenix Stadium.
Well, that's very well put there, Marshall, and I guess I can get you out of here on a softball question. How do you see the Super Bowl playing out in a couple weeks?
I think it's going to be slow to start. I'm just hoping that there's not a safety on the first play like the last couple of years. That'd be nice if we could mix that up. But I honestly see Brady finishing the job. I don't see how he could lose 3 in a row after winning 3 because he knows kind of what this moment means, and I think so late in his career he understands that he has the team, he has the coaching staff, and he has the ability to finish if they play the right way. And I listened to Vince Wilfork on his post-game press conference after the AFC Championship, and he was another guy who was just emotional talking about what it means to get back because a lot of people forget how long Vince has been a Patriot and how Ninkovich has stepped in, and he was a role player before he was a main guy, and now he plays about 95% of the defensive snaps for the Patriots. And there's just a real group feeling that I think is very unique to the Patriots and their ability to change and be multiple week to week and be smart with their schemes and rotate defensively. And they've got those big corners now, and Browner will be facing his former team, and Revis was a dream corner when they got him, a couple of years ago. So I think it's a great matchup, but I do see the Patriots coming out on top because I don't see any way how this team could collapse 3 times in a row. The law of averages says they have to get one, and I think this is the one.
Well, this would be where the offense evens the score up against the defense when the top offense meets a top defense. So that'll be interesting. It's a matchup I'm really excited about. I'm not the biggest Patriot guy, but I think you have to respect the Patriots if you're a hardcore football fan and what Brady's done with this team in such a free agent era. So it'll be a very interesting matchup come Sunday, February 1st. Marshall, I guess before you officially leave, what are you up to and where can people contact you if they want to, talk to you about sports?
Yeah, anytime. On Twitter, @Marsh2Fergs. I like to chat on there all the time. I've also got a radio show going on at McMaster. It's @Marauder_radio. We air out of 93.3 CFMU, so I do that, talk some varsity sports and mix in some pro stuff, and put a video podcast of that out on a couple of different YouTube pages. But @Marsh2Fergs on Twitter is the main one. It's the easiest.
This has been former University McMaster Marauder quarterback Marshall Ferguson. Marshall, thanks for joining us and great insight as always.
Thanks, Jason.